Welcome back, and my guest this evening is Reserve Bank Governor Lesetja Kganyago, and he was talking about VBS earlier on. What about the depositors who've been sleeping outside the branches of VBS now? Is there any relief that they are being granted?
Well, definitely there is relief. And this is what had actually worried me about the conversation around VBS, when people talked about you are letting a black bank go and so forth, and as if those 22,000 depositors are less black than the shareholders of VBS. Our job as regulators is to protect the interest of the depositors. And we now can confirm that depositors could access up to 100,000 of their deposits with VBS. We will lift the 1,000 rands limit from the 13th of July, which means that people can freely take their money or leave it on deposit, or they can move it to another deposit. We would also discourage people from trying, if you have 100,000, go and withdraw 100,000 and try to carry it out of the bank, because you will introduce yourself to all sorts of risks.
All right, let's talk about the other part that concerns South Africans at the moment, because one of the key areas that you are focused on is inflation, making sure that we stay within the band of, was it up to 6%, as well as the interest rates, right? Now, we see the fuel price going up. It's going to impact public transport, the taxi industry, and so on. And then VAT has gone up. Food prices are going up. The majority of poorer South Africans are going to be adversely affected by all of this. How does that inform the decisions that you take as the Reserve Bank? What do you think should be happening in South Africa at this time?
I'm glad you have brought it in this manner, because inflation hurts the poor the hardest. You and I can protect ourselves against inflation. The rich can protect themselves against inflation. They own financial assets. They own financial assets which might even be linked to some foreign currency or linked to the domestic currency, and they can hedge them. They can protect themselves against inflation. There are all sorts of products that they can buy that protect them against inflation. The poor do not have that option, and the poor spend the bulk of their money on food and on transport and the lot. And when those prices go up, the poor suffer. It is for that reason that the authors of our constitution felt there must be an institution that acts independently, whose task it is to keep inflation in check. That said, you identified fuel. In the previous increase in fuel prices, the key driver was the oil price. The exchange rate contributed. But in the most recent increase in the fuel price, the key driver was actually the depreciation of the currency. So you felt that. So now, in a way, what you are having is that it is what we call as central banks an external shock. When there is an external shock to the inflation outlook, the nature of the response of monetary policy is to allow the shock to dissipate through the system, such that you do not respond in a knee-jerk manner. And so that is the one component. The thing about food prices are not rising as fast, by the way, as a result because of global food prices and the fact that we had actually broken the back of drought from 2 years ago. So that helps. But in essence here, the central bank has got to control inflation, because if the central bank does not control inflation, the poor who are receiving, for example, social grants,
yes,
you have got a fixed social grant. If inflation goes up, your social grant buys less and less.
But now, Governor, you are responsible for a certain part of the economy, which we've already outlined now. But you are monitoring and watching what's going on in the overall economy. Now, the question I want to ask you has got to do with the growing demand for services, for instance, and the stagnant growth in the economy, the diminishing number of taxpayers, the under-collection of taxes, as we have seen in South Africa. You are a widely traveled man. You interact with your colleagues at different platforms, conferences, and so on. And congratulations. I know you've also been appointed to one of the senior positions within the IMF. When you look at what's going on with South Africa and its potential, and you look at the high unemployment rate, for instance, and the lack of growth that obtains in our economy, what do you think? What is it that we're doing wrong, that we could be doing, that is there for us to do, but we're not doing, that is a constraint on our economy?
You know, I've often heard people talk about jobless growth, but I do not know of anything called growthless job growth. In other words, there is no economy in the world that has sustainably created jobs unless it is growing. So, if South Africans have to create jobs, if South Africa has to create jobs, we have got to get the economy growing. And the economy does not grow because you fiddle with some cyclical policies here and there. You need the hard policies, which we basically call structural policies. And I will just name but a few. You need to get investment going. One of the key sectors for us is mining. If there is to be investment in mining, and mining, you sink a shaft, you only see cash in 15 years or so, you only really start seeing profitability in a period from 20 to 30 years. You need certainty that this is the policy framework of the country. It is going to be so over the next 20 or 30 years.
Sure.
And if you are not sure, you can't sink the money. Fortunately, government has started the conversation to bring certainty into that. That's exactly what we needed to be doing. Secondly, the South African state-owned corporations play a very significant role in the economy, mainly in the network industry, whether you are talking about rail and ports, and whether you are talking about roads and so forth,
Yep.
whether you're talking about electricity and so forth. And yet, governance in these entities was basically non-existent. And again, government is coming in to say that let us sort out the governance. It's those structural issues that are difficult for us to deal with.
Sure. But now people look at, the period that we've traversed from 1994 until now and say, but when is this democracy dividend going to be felt by the broader number of South Africans? Very briefly, please. What do you see what do you see improving in our economy that must give all of us optimism going forward from where you're sitting?
Now, I've got to break this into three epochs. The first epoch is an epoch from 1994 to roughly 1998, 1999. That, for me, was an epoch of sorting out the apartheid mess, sorting out the public finances and getting the public finances on a sounder footing. The period from 1999 until 2007 was what I had called basically the boom years, where South Africa was starting to reap the fruit of the trees that we had planted in the years when we had to make difficult decisions. What characterized that period? That period was characterized by low inflation. It was characterized by growth that topped 5.5%. It was characterized by unemployment that dropped from 32% to 21%. It was characterized by an environment where investment was in excess of 20% of GDP, and we were thinking that the South African economy could grow at 6%. And we were very clear that unless we get this economy growing by between 5 and 6%, we will not be able to reap the democracy dividend.
So what happened then? Because we're no longer there.
Well,
very brief response.
Two things happened. One was that we experienced the global financial crisis, which found us actually pretty well prepared. And secondly was that we didn't do the things that we were supposed to continue doing then. So whether you look at the fact that government had the ASGISA, the Accelerated Short-Term Growth Initiative, it had to be implemented, and we decided we seemed to have not continued with that. We had the new growth path, didn't seem to continue with that. We have got the new the National Development Plan. Execute. That is what we are faced with. We have got to execute these policies that we had formulated with respect to structural reforms that should lift the potential growth of the economy.
The Governor of the Reserve Bank, Lesetja Kganyago, thank you very much for having been our guest. We appreciate it. Thank you. Well, that's the Governor, and we thank him for having spent time with us and sharing his thoughts on what we can do as South Africa. My next guest is a woman who's pioneered her way through life, the newly appointed University of Cape Town Vice-Chancellor, Professor Mamokgethi Phakeng, and she'll be talking to us about issues facing the institution as well as ideas on how to transform the tertiary education sector.